I think that very often political campaigns almost move away from that. You know, the one in which we're in, 2/3 of the coverage is on the politics, and only 17%, I think, on the proposals of the candidates, 15% on their life history, and only 1% on their record. I think what matters most is record and proposals. I mean, basically, most people in public life are honest, and they do what they say they're going to do, or at least they try to. And what I wanted people to do was to be able to come into this place and revere the American system and feel good about it and know that there was a real connection between the ideas people advance, the policies they implement, and the impact in people's lives. And everything in this library is designed to fulfill one or more of those objectives.
This is a picture from the William J. Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock, Arkansas. During our program, we'll be showing you more of our exclusive interview done with the former president earlier this week, as well as taking you through his library and museum throughout the next 2 hours.
When Newt told old...
We'll also take you into Bill Clinton's executive suite atop the library. The first time television cameras have been allowed to record video there. And all the archival video you'll see tonight was shot by crews from the White House television office and comes to us from the collections of the Clinton Presidential Library. Joining us in our Washington, D.C. studios is our historian who's been with us throughout the 12-part presidential series. This is our last one, Richard Norton Smith. Tell us the theme of this program.
Well, you know, one of the great things I think about this series has been our attempt to do some counterintuitive things, to not only show people video and footage and images of presidents that they might not have seen or anticipated, but also to introduce them to some information. And I think tonight is an opportunity to do that as well. You know, this is the first baby boomer president, and a man whose presidency, when we were going through it, often felt like an emotional roller coaster. And yet, with the passage of time, I think it's possible to see beyond some of the immediate controversies and realize that this was a more consequential presidency than perhaps the conventional thinking in this town suggested at the time. And that Bill Clinton, among other things, is a significant agent of change within his own party, arguably within the country and beyond.
We're going to see an interview that we conducted with the former president on Monday morning inside his Oval Office replica there at the museum. How many of these libraries have an Oval Office?
Oh boy, it's a good question. Almost all of them. The Roosevelt does not. And now, of course, the revamped George Bush does. So I think the Roosevelt may be the only one, and they have a partial Oval Office.
When you think of the Clinton presidency, what's the theme?
I think the theme is of someone who learned the job, who had, by most accounts, a fairly rocky year, although even when things were rockiest. You know, again, the conventional wisdom in this town was this was a president who was unwilling to spend his political capital to put his high poll numbers on the line. But even in that first year, he took on his own party, his own base to pass NAFTA, free trade legislation opposed by labor unions, for example, and the Budget Act of 1993, which I think everyone now looks upon as a real landmark, was passed without a single Republican vote and by no means unanimity among the Democrats. That said, there's no doubt that it was a difficult first 2 years, of course capped by losing the Congress for the first time in 40 years in '94. And in a curious sort of way, that was almost liberating. And I think the second part of the Clinton presidency, not just the second term, but the post-'94, is of a man who in many ways is coming into his own, in part because he learns that as much as he wants to change things, incremental change is better than no change at all.
Well, one of the things we talked to him about was this whole controversy over the records. Set up for us what this current situation is with this library and release of the records.
Well, there is a controversy. Some might argue a little bit of a manufactured controversy, but...
who manufactured it?
Well, Okay, Judicial Watch, which is a self-professed public watchdog on the government, I believe has filed suit in an effort to get access to Senator Clinton's calendars, I believe phone logs, and I think the records from her healthcare task force. I believe that's what they're asking for. Now, not surprisingly, many in the press and some other political candidates have joined in the cry to open this material. Why isn't this material open? If you're running upon your experience, you should be perfectly willing to let us see firsthand evidence of that experience. That at least is the way they have framed the argument.
Here is about a 6-minute discussion about this records controversy.
When you look through your museum, you have all the stacks set up where actual records are in those boxes down there.
Yeah.
As you know, there is a controversy about the release of records, both communication between you and your wife, and just moving stuff along. Sharon Fawcett, who is a person at the head of the National Archives and Records Administration for Presidential Library, said everybody is working within the executive order now and within the law. What do you say, though, to those that are going to be hitting at you and Senator Clinton for not releasing more of these records?
First of all, since this law that we're operating under now has been in effect, that is from President Reagan forward, I have worked to release more records more quickly than anybody else. I want this stuff out there. Some of it may be misused, and some people may want it for the reasons that are not entirely academic, but that's okay. I want the records out there. I wanted to give all my records to the 9/11 Commission. I wanted all the support necessary. We kept meticulous records, and I wanted to give it to them. The public has to know they're not my records. They belong to and under the jurisdiction of the archives. But I have the power to keep all of them closed for 12 years. I didn't do that. We've released about 1 million pages already. I want to push the release of more, including the request for documents about Hillary's time in the White House. They'll show how hard she worked on a wide variety of issues and what she did in her travels around the world to advance America's cause. So I'd like it if the records got out there. But there are certain rules the archives has about reviewing them. Then they have to go to then we review them, and then the White House has requested the right to review some of them. Now they're being pretty good now, the White House is, about letting them out. The archives has some rules. They have a strict first come, first served policy, and they also, when they send us documents, they won't release them until we review them all. So for example, the other day, as soon as this controversy arose, Bruce Lindsay, who has other things to do, had 26,000 pages of documents to review. He had already reviewed 20,000. So he said, let's give the people 20,000 documents. And the archive said, nope, we won't release one page until you get all 26,000. Now, I don't know why that's their policy, but we have asked them, I've asked them already on 2 occasions if they would speed up a particular release, and they declined to do so. That's okay. But the American public just needs to know we're getting this stuff out as soon as we can. Now, there was a request, I think, for all of Hillary's schedules, and I think that'll be out sometime in January. But someone literally has to review all that. I don't think people understand how time-consuming it is. For example, on her schedule, if there is an advanced person, as there was, let's say she represents America in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan in my first term. In each one of those places where she stopped, there was an advanced person. If there was a private cell phone number there, the archivist has to go through and mark that out for privacy reasons, just on the off chance that they still have the same cell phone number. If there were the names of Secret Service agents or a list in questionable places of how many agents were there, they mark that out so they won't be giving deployment information. Those are their rules, not mine. And I get why they do it. But we're not trying to hold up anything. I am pushing this faster than any of my predecessors since the new law's been enacted.
It seems to be a kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe a catch-22, but the Congress only appropriates so much money, so there are really only 6 archivists at each one of these libraries.
That's correct.
So the president comes along in executive order in November of 2001 that gives you more opportunity to hold back stuff, but everybody keeps pointing the finger at everybody else.
But you have records on me. I didn't hold back stuff. I've actually tried to accelerate I've already released a lot of things I didn't have to release for 12 years. So I think that I'm entitled to the benefit of the doubt here. Obviously, I'm not trying to cover anything up. I'm trying to get this stuff out. But I'm sympathetic with the archives. They have a limited number of resources, and they do have rules for going through all this stuff that make sense. Essentially, what's happened is that some members of the press and people in the political community who are on the other side of Hillary, which they have every right to be, are taking the position that because she's running for president, all the rules should be suspended and they should get what they want, and they should get it now, whether we go through the regular processes of the archives or not, and whether we treat people on a first-come, first-served basis or not. And, you know, that I guess the government could decide to do that, but I think it's unlikely that they will, because there were other people who are taxpayers too who filed requests for other information before they did, and they believe preserving the integrity of these records and following the letter of the law requires them to meticulously review all this. So the only holdup I can be in the current system is when the archivists finish and they give it to us for review, if my designated reviewer, Bruce Lindsay, takes too long to review it. So far, that's not the case. As I told you, when he went through 20 pages, he tried to get that released to the public. So all I want the people to understand is we proved that we're trying to get this out earlier than my predecessors, going back to President Reagan, did. I think that he was the first president covered by this law. We have proved that we're push this stuff out the door as soon as we can. I am not afraid to have my records made public. I worked hard. Hillary worked hard. Our people worked hard. We did our best to do a good job. We didn't make every call right. Most of that is already known by the public. If there's anything to be learned by the records, let them show it. But I think we have to follow the law. They're not my records, and it's not my law.
On your screen from the library live tonight are the boxes that are full of some of the many documents that the library has there in Little Rock. Richard Norton Smith, I'm confused. You ran 4 of these libraries, 4 of these presidential libraries. How do you know who to believe in this?
Well, look, let's provide a little bit of context. Presidents, we talk about presidents being in a bubble, but the bubble looks very different when you're inside the bubble. Presidents, whatever their party, believe that they are constantly bombarded with criticism, much of it in the media, and that is in effect setting the first draft of history. Journalism is, after all, the first draft of history. So by the time they leave office, they welcome the opportunity, in effect, to tell their side of the story by getting their documents out. I can tell you, Ronald Reagan, I know for a fact, very, very Reagan-esque, naive but admirable. He wanted to wave a magic wand and open every single document in his library pertaining to U.S.-Soviet relations. Well, of course, the national security apparatus, went slack-jawed at that. I know from working with President Ford personally. So my point being, presidents of both parties, as a rule, Richard Nixon didn't burn the tapes because he thought they were going to exonerate him. So presidents believe that the records that they and their associates compile, on balance, are actually going to help their case before the bar of history. And in fact, there's a long record that suggests that. If you look at how presidential reputations rise, they rise once the papers become available and scholars begin to reassess what they read in the press at the time. In terms of the specifics about this controversy, it is absolutely true that this is incredibly painstaking, labor-intensive, line-by-line review, that there are not the human resources available at the libraries to do this, and that hundreds of researchers are waiting in line at this and other libraries to get their oar in the water.
It was on November the 18th, 2004 that the library in Little Rock opened. You'll see a picture here in a moment of the outside of it. The Arkansas River's right on the other side of that structure that you see there. There's some 13 acres. And by the way, tonight down in Little Rock, Skip Rutherford, who's the dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, and his master's students, some 30 of them, are having a watch party to make sure that to keep both you, Richard Norton Smith, and the library director, Terry Garner, honest. Terry Garner, 25 days into this job. Why did you want this job as the director of the Clinton Library?
Oh, this is the dream job. How could you not want this job? It's the epitome of a historian, the job you want, and to be able to use the combination of your skill as a historian, but also to bring a business aspect to it and develop it and watch it grow.
So what was the process and how were you chosen and who do you work for?
I work for Sharon Fawcett, the Archivist of the United States, or the Assistant Archivist of the United States. The selection process was rather interesting, actually. I found the job posting on a professional historical website. I sent my resume to the presidential libraries. It was reviewed by Sharon Fawcett and her staff, and she recommended me and others to the Archivist of the United States, Alan Weinstein. At that point, I was asked to interview for the job in Washington with the archivist and Sharon and representatives of President Clinton. And then with consultation with the president, because that is the right of the Presidential Records Act, suggests that the archivist will consult with the president upon hiring the director of his or her library. And after that consultation, I was offered the job.
So how does Bill Clinton relate to you in this process? Can he tell you what to do?
No, President Clinton can't tell me what to do. He may try, but I work for the federal government, and I work for Sharon Fawcett and Alan Weinstein.
Where did you come from?
I was born in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. And then I moved in. I had many jobs across the country. I've been in California, New Jersey, Denver, Colorado, and I last was in Bangor, Maine.
So what's the job of the library director, and what's your number one or two problems that you're looking to deal with after 25 days in the new position?
Well, hoping to make it to 30 days is the first one. But after that, this is an interesting library. It's an interesting time. One of the problems that we're having, you've already discussed, we have archival problems getting the papers through the system and meeting everybody's demands. But it also is an opportunity to really review the process and to make sure that everyone understands that these papers belong to the people of the United States. And the process itself sometimes can be difficult to get through, but it is very time consuming, and it's also time consuming to pick when we have, the major problem we have is we have 80 million documents, we have 20 million emails, we have 83,000 videos, we have a very large amount of information that we need to protect, preserve, and in some fashion be able to present to the American people. It's quite a challenge to store it, to record it, to understand where it is at all times, and then of course to get through the archival problems of the documents themselves.
Terry Garner, we'll be back to you in just a moment, but Richard Norton Smith, go back to 1992. How did Bill Clinton get elected?
Well, Bill Clinton had established a record of sorts. In 1974, he ran for Congress and narrowly lost, and 2 years later he came back and was elected Attorney General of Arkansas, I believe, unopposed. In 1978, he became the youngest governor in America, and he lost the job 2 years later, and he came back in 1982. So in 1992, at the outset, remember in the wake of the Gulf War, when George Bush had 90% approval ratings, it was assumed that the Democratic nomination might not be worth very much. And also in the early stages, it was believed that that other candidates, that basically Bill Clinton was not necessarily a front runner. But he very quickly established himself as a indefatigable campaigner and someone who could break out of his southern regional base. The New York primary was absolutely critical, for example. He won it going away, and it became pretty clear that he would be the nominee. He presented himself, I think in many ways, as an agent of generational change, and that both attracted and in some cases I think it repelled parts of the electorate. How you felt about the 1960s tell you a lot about how you're likely to feel about the Clintons. And in 1992, I think it worked to his advantage. There's a sense that President Bush was a foreign policy president. The recession was certainly lingering on. Bill Clinton was a very attractive alternative. And there was a sense of turning the page, generationally and otherwise.
A couple of thoughts. That one of the first things that they did as an administration was the health care task force and got Hillary Rodham Clinton involved in it.
Well, that was an extension, really, of what they had done in Arkansas. Because as First Lady of Arkansas, Mrs. Clinton had led a controversial but ultimately successful effort, major overhaul of education. So it was not far-fetched for the new president to turn to her to undertake this defining mission at the very outset of his presidency.
The White House television office follows these presidents around nowadays, and there's some video we're going to show from Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. What is it?
Well, actually, this was the G7 Economic Summit, which began way back in the Ford administration. It's now an annual event. And this is the first year, the first summer, actually, of the Clinton presidency. And the president is speaking to a student audience and gets the following question.
Ask you two questions. How do American people think about Mrs. Hillary Clinton acting or making political speeches in official situations? And second, what do you yourself think of her as your political partner?
Well, first of all, most American women, even with young children, are in the workforce now. More than half of them, even with children under 6, are in the workforce. That presents us with a great source of wealth and talent to strengthen America. It also presents us with challenges, providing adequate care for the children, trying to provide adequate time for the parents to be with the children. After all, raising children is still the most important work of any society, and it should not be minimized. But I strongly believe that women should have equal opportunities with men in all areas. We have many women in the United States Senate. We have many women governors of states, and someday before long, I think we'll have a woman president. As you noted, my wife is a lawyer. We're both lawyers, and most people who know us think that she is the real lawyer in our family. So I like it when she gives political speeches, when she works as she is now as the head of our task force to reform our health care system. I asked her to do it because I thought she had more ability than anyone else I knew to do that job. And if we get that done for the American people, that will be perhaps the most important social reform in America in a generation. And so I think I would be irresponsible as the President of the United States not to use the talents of someone I know can serve the American people. It's very simple to me. It's a straightforward thing. Now, having said that, this issue is still, it's not as controversial perhaps as in Japan, but it's still a controversial issue at home. There's still people who have some reservations about the role of women in various areas of our life. There are still people who have certain reservations about whether a spouse of a political leader should make speeches, have opinions that are expressed, and do this kind of work. I might say that most of the people who say that my wife shouldn't be doing this really disagree with our position. They're saying, oh, well, you know, she shouldn't be doing this, but most of them just don't agree with what we're trying to do. But so there is some controversy in the United States about it, but I think most people, and I know most women, respect the fact that the First Lady is functioning as a full citizen and as a full, as a partner, as a part of this administration. I am ultimately responsible for the decisions that the President must make. There are all kinds of things that we never even talk about, but to ask her to do something she is clearly competent and able to do, it seems to me is the right thing to do for America.
That was in 1993, and what you see on your screen right there is that this is the First Lady section of the museum at the Bill Clinton Library Museum in Little Rock. Any reaction to what he said there?
Well, yeah, 20% of the American working public had no coverage at the beginning of the Clinton administration. Everyone agreed that there was a problem. They basically had, they wanted to have universal coverage through employer mandates with something called managed competition to try to hold down costs. Sounds simple. The final program was anything but simple. The bill was over 1,300 pages, and that sounded its death knell. In this city, it's harder to get, it's easier to prevent something from happening than to make something happen. And the more complex something is, it's easier to prevent it. And I think, though, a lesson was learned. As I said at the outset, the notion of incremental as opposed to sweeping change. And the president himself later on said we made a mistake. We should have led off with welfare reform rather than trying to reform the entire healthcare system.
We want to open up the phones. The numbers will be on your screen. You can begin dialing now. We're going to get you on the air here in just a few moments. It's a 202 area code 737-0001 if you are a Democrat, 737-0002 if you're a Republican, and 628-0205 if you are truly an independent. Another one of those issues, Richard Norton Smith, that came up early in the administration was gays in the military.
That's right, and it was really not by any design of the president or those around him. Remember, Bill Clinton had run as a New Democrat. Someone who at least was culturally attuned to the middle of the road. At the same time, he had also made a campaign promise to allow openly gay individuals to serve in the armed forces. The problem was that the Joint Chiefs, among others, didn't think much of that idea. And they, led by Colin Powell, with support from people like Sam Nunn in the Senate and Bob Byrd, made it very clear that they would oppose this. And the president was forced into a compromise, which was in fact suggested by Powell, what we now call don't ask, don't tell, which in effect legislated hypocrisy.
If you've just joined us for this series, this is the 12th in a 12-part series, our last night of a special look at the libraries. There are 12 of them. Richard Norton Smith actually has run 4 of them, plus the Abraham Lincoln Library, which is not a part of the federal system. And our objective isn't to cover a president from start to finish, to cover the entire administration. The objective is to go on kind of a treasure hunt in these libraries and find new things. It's been harder at the Clinton Library because it's brand new, and there's a process that they're living with. And so a great deal of this 2-hour program is built around about 60 minutes that we spent with former President Clinton earlier this week on Monday, and some archival footage. Now, there's some footage we're going to show now that about gays in the military. Where was that?
This is actually 9 days into the administration, where the president is announcing the compromise, a compromise I don't think he was terribly happy with at the time, and in fact before the end of his presidency was pretty openly critical of.
The debate over whether to lift the ban on homosexuals in the military has, to put it mildly, sparked a great deal of interest over the last few days. Today, as you know, I have reached an agreement, at least with Senator Nunn and Senator Mitchell, about how we will proceed in the next few days. But first, I'd like to explain what I believe about this issue and why, and what I have decided to do after a long conversation, and a very good one, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and discussions with several members of Congress. The issue is not whether there should be homosexuals in the military. Everyone concedes that there are. The issue is whether men and women who can and have served with real distinction should be excluded from military service solely on the basis of their status. And I believe they should not. The principle on which I base this position is this. I believe that American citizens who want to serve their country should be able to do so unless their conduct disqualifies them from doing so. Military life is fundamentally different from civilian society. It necessarily has a different and stricter code of conduct, even a different code of justice. Nonetheless, individuals who are prepared to accept all necessary restrictions on their behavior, many of which would be intolerable in civilian society, should be able to serve their country honorably and well. I have asked the Secretary of Defense to submit by July the 15th a draft executive order after full consultation with military and congressional leaders and concerned individuals outside of the government, which would end the present policy solely on the basis of, of this exclusion from military service, solely on the basis of sexual orientation, and at the same time establish rigorous standards regarding sexual conduct to be applied to all military personnel. So the single area of disagreement is this: should someone be able to serve their country in uniform if they say they are homosexuals, but they do nothing which it violates the code of conduct or undermines unit cohesion or morale apart from that statement? That is what all the furor of the last few days has been about. And the practical and not insignificant issues raised by that issue are what will be studied in the next 6 months.
The video on your screen shows one of the 3 Cadillacs that the president had built for him, and one of those is at the museum right now. Richard Norton Smith, what impact did this issue of gays in the military have on the early part of his administration?
Well, I think it was a part of an education for the president, maybe perhaps in the short term a little bit of a humbling. I think it was an education in the limits of presidential power. For example, those who opposed this policy, including many who had supported him in the '92 campaign, said, look, take a page out of Harry Truman's book. Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces with an executive order. You have the same option. And the new president responded that, in fact, if he did that, it was very likely that Congress, in its current mood, would overturn his action. And so, again, it was part of maybe a little bit of a roughing up of the new president. This had come right after, remember, the Zoe Baird failed nomination for Attorney General, and the danger, the people at the White House were concerned that it would leave an impression, obviously unintended, that the president could be rolled.
We're going to take some calls, and Richard Norton Smith's here to take your questions and comments. Also, Terry Garner, the new library director at the Clinton Library. Let's go to Sunrise, Minnesota. You're up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, if Hillary Clinton would become the next president, would they combine the 2 libraries? And then what role could a former president play in her administration? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Smith.
I have no idea. Maybe Terry would want to address the question about the library. Or
actually, I asked him that question in the interview, and the entire interview will be played after this program is over. And he basically kind of sloughed it off because, he said it's too early in the process for that.
In terms of the role that a former president could play, Lord, I guess the only thing remotely like this situation, remember back in 1980 when briefly there was talk about putting Gerald Ford on the ticket with Ronald Reagan as a vice president. So a former vice president turned vice president, and there was, they never could make this co-presidency work. So we are in uncharted waters here, and that's what makes it fascinating.
Nashville, Tennessee next. Charleston, West Virginia next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I want to know how the Clinton Library handles the Whitewater and the Lewinsky investigations as well as the impeachment.
Terry Garner, you want to deal with that? We're gonna show in a few minutes, but how would you say they deal with it?
Well, we have a part of the exhibit is dedicated to that, and it's entitled "The Struggle for Power," and it encompasses the entire all the steps that the president took during that time and the things that happened to him. It's a whole segment of the museum exhibit.
Nashville, Tennessee, you're next now. Go ahead, please.
Okay. First of all, Brian, I hope you get better. I think that possibly with your flu or illness that you have, that maybe you would have respected the audience enough by having someone else take your position in the position of host. Also, I think that it's very important that the audience understand that Richard Norton Smith is a Republican, and he is coming at President Clinton's 8-year history from a very strong Republican philosophy. So I think we all need to understand that. Thirdly, I think that the person who rolled President Clinton in those first 3 days in office was none other than Colin Powell. Colin Powell took the step of aggressor in pushing this don't ask, don't tell policy. And I think that Colin Powell's credibility is quite suspect now, since his wonderful commentary at the UN in which he just lied to this world about what was going on in Iraq. Would like your comment.
Interesting. I'm not aware I said anything. We're 38 minutes into the program. I'm not aware I said anything critical of President Clinton. On the contrary, I talked about a counterintuitive view of the Clinton presidency as more consequential than perhaps it was viewed by some at the time, though presumably not the caller.
Augusta, Montana, go ahead, please.
Yes, someone already asked the question about if there's any displays about his impeachment in the library.
And that's your question?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Fitchburg, Massachusetts, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm wondering, how well did the former presidents get along, and did they visit the Clinton Library and visit Bill Clinton there at the library?
You know, that's a very interesting question. The very first president in the series, Herbert Hoover, talked about our exclusive trade union. And here you can see on the screen Presidents Clinton, Carter, and Bush 41. I assume this was probably at the opening of the Clinton Library 3 years ago. It is a unique kind of fraternity to which they belong. And for example, I think people have been genuinely impressed and in many ways even inspired to see the joint efforts of Presidents Bush and Clinton, for example, on the tsunami relief effort in Indonesia, and again following Hurricane Katrina. And I can tell you, from personal knowledge, that in the last few months, President Clinton happened to be in Grand Rapids, and he stopped by to pay his respects at the gravesite of President Ford, someone who he got to know pretty well during his presidency. So, it's a really largely nonpartisan group. They find many of the same demands. They have many of the same things in common. Once they leave office, they all are immediately faced with the need to raise tens of millions of dollars to build and staff and program a presidential library. And it's good to see these friendships that have developed, as people know, Ford-Carter friendship and now the Clinton-Bush relationship.
Our next call is Odenton, Maryland. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. You had asked earlier how many presidential libraries have Oval Office replicas, and it's actually 6 of them. The Ford, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Truman, and Johnson have replicas. The rest have either sets or nothing about Oval Offices.
I'd have to go back over that. We'll come back to that.
Let me ask Terry Gardner. Can people go into this Oval Office there at the library and museum?
No, it is blocked off. They can walk in and see it with, we have the blockage up so that they can't walk in because it is an exact replica of the Oval Office when President Clinton was there. So many of the objects in there are also artifacts and part of the collection. Many are also reproductions, but we're protecting the artifacts that are original.
You were commenting earlier off air that about the Johnson Oval Office.
Well, yeah, there's a wonderful story. President Johnson's library was already under construction, and he decided, having visited some of the other libraries, that he wanted an Oval Office, and it simply was not possible to build it in the existing floor plan. The only way it could be created was to put it on top of this, I believe, 8-story building that towers over the University of Texas campus. And then it had to be 7/8 size. It couldn't be full scale. So then the issue arose, well, that's fine, but who's going to tell President Johnson that his office, his Oval Office, is 7/8 scale? And the unanimous choice was Mrs. Johnson.
Here's a clip from the interview on Monday about humor, because if you go to the museum, you'll find that one of the things that gets the most attention is some video that's shown up on the second floor of the museum there on humor. Let's listen to President Clinton.
What's your reaction to the fact that the most popular thing in your museum is the moments of laughter and some of the jokes you told at a lot of the different events in Washington?
Oh, I think it's great, because I think, you know, most Americans didn't get to see that at the time. And we've had about 1 million people come through here now since we opened our doors almost 3 years ago. And I think it's good for them to be reminded that politicians are people and that they can laugh even when there are great crises going on in the world and problems, and that and it's not surprising to me that they like that, because I think it shows them something that most of them didn't know.
What has been your own approach to humor over the years? What's your attitude about it? And
I love jokes. I love to hear them. I love to tell them. I love to look for the something funny in the most difficult circumstances. I think humor first is a part of life. I think life is inherently humorous as well as serious if you look for it, and I think it's kind of necessary for peace of mind and even sanity in Washington. You know, I think our greatest presidents, they didn't all have a sense of humor. As far as we know, Washington didn't have much of a sense of humor, but Lincoln sure did. Roosevelt did. Kennedy did. Reagan did. I love, you know, like when I was the governor of Arkansas, we made a living on the humor circuit down here. My two senators and predecessors as governor, Dale Bumpers and David Pryor, and I had to learn in Washington when I got there that the publicly expressed sense of humor in Washington couldn't be quite as open and widespread as it was when I was in Arkansas. That was one of the many ways that Washington was more conservative than Arkansas. For example, the press didn't have near the sense of humor in Washington they did in Arkansas. You could, if you were willing to make fun of yourself when I was governor, you could make fun of everybody else. When I did these press events, you were only supposed to make fun of yourself or somebody else in politics. But I loved it. I thought it was fun.
On your screen is a sign that says thanks a million, because in September the library had 1 million visitors from its opening in 2004. That's the museum in the background, as you can see. And very near where this sign is the Clinton Museum store. And in the Clinton Museum store there's where they have a lot of their best-selling DVDs and other items. Terry Gardner, why is the store, we weren't able to see it there, but why is it so separate from the museum itself?
Well, that was a conscious decision, and there's two reasons for it. One is there was a special tax rebate with the state of Arkansas on sales tax that if you placed it outside of a nonprofit environment, the rebate was given. But more importantly, that's a minor reason. The most important reason was it was also part of the rebuilding of the downtown area. That River Market area is the end that ties the downtown of Little Rock to the Presidential Center and Library. And it's a good transition, and we could keep it open at different hours, longer hours. It's a larger space, and it would then provide the opportunity for growth. We sell a lot more things in that museum store than many stores because of the size and space. It's a good decision.
I have in my hand a DVD that picked up there in the library. It's called A Time to Laugh, and part of what's on here is some gridiron video. We're going to show a clip that's never been seen before from a gridiron dinner. Why does this? Why is the gridiron dinner closed to outsiders?
Well, so presidents can, in a sense, speak their mind and be a little bit more candid. Not only presidents, but the press corps that puts on the show. It's some people think it's a kind of a stuffy ritual that's outworn. It's welcome, but it goes on, and it is one of the must-dos. I do think it's very interesting. If you watched last week, you saw President Bush, 41, at his several gridiron events, and you were about to see President Clinton at 1996. You'd never guess from watching him, because he seems utterly comfortable, that I'm not sure this was a favorite part for him of being president, going to these big formal events full of Washington reporters. And, it will come as a surprise to some of our viewers, but the Clintons felt every bit as victimized, I don't think is too strong a word, by the professional journalistic culture in Washington as any of their Republican predecessors.
This was given to us by the museum for this program.
Let me first thank Senator Lott for being here. I identify with Senator Lott. I mean, I know he's a Republican now, and that means it's his job to turn me into an alien. But after all, we both grew up in modest families in the South. Neither one of us has an accent. We both get too many phone calls from Dick Morris, and Bob Dole doesn't return our calls at all. So I'm glad to be here with him. You remember we had one of these press dinners about a week ago, and some of you may have noticed me grimacing in obvious pain during the remarks of the hired entertainment. But look, it's not what you think. How many times you heard me say that? Look, folks, I can be responsible for a lot of things, but what you think is beyond my... But anyway, it's not what you think. I mean, really, this time it was. What was happening to me was I was getting these minute-by-minute reports of the grave injustice that the University of Massachusetts basketball team was wreaking on my beloved Arkansas Razorbacks. It was gruesome. It was awful. At one point, I sent a note to Mike McCurry and suggested we ought to just get up and leave before he finished speaking. And then I sent him a note asking him to contact CBS and request that they just not broadcast the second half of the ball game. Well, how was Imus anyway? I thought it was quite funny. Somebody said that, my wife is in, she went to Bosnia and I came here and we draw straws and I lost. Have you heard that joke? Someone said that 4 or 5 hours ago here. That is not what happened. She went to Bosnia days ago. She could have been here tonight. That's not what happened. She and Chelsea have been combing the ancient ruins from Ephesus to the Acropolis, looking for very, very old records that might be of interest to Senator D'Amato. I was asked tonight by the Gridiron Club, Jack forgot to do this, to express our thanks publicly, Mr. Ambassador, to the British Embassy, which in honor of the relationship between the British government and the British press has donated 700 portions of the filet mignon we enjoyed tonight. And and since I was the last person on the program, I got this note from the kitchen staff. It says, and I quote, "We have a list of all the senators who voted against the minimum wage bill." And a seating chart. Hope you enjoyed the seafood medley.
Video from 1996. This is now video from 1993, the day after the inauguration. Anything that the president said there you want to comment on at the Gridiron dinner?
Well, only the reference to Don Imus. I guess he turned out to be prophetic in many ways. Imus had, I think, shocked the sensibilities of many in Washington with what a lot of people thought was a rather tasteless routine at I think it was the White House Correspondents' Dinner not long before the Gridiron. But you see, if you remember what the president said in your interview, he talked about you come to Washington and humor's got to be at your own expense. You can't laugh about the press. And if you notice, there's a healthy amount of self-deprecatory humor that you just heard, with a few well-placed jabs at his tormentors in the special prosecutors and Senator D'Amato.
The irony is that Don Imus goes back on the radio on Monday morning. Let's go to Newcastle, Indiana. You're on the air.
Oh, I am so proud, sir, to be on your show. This is my very favorite president. I'm 70 years old, and when the first white beam went up down there at the library, my husband's name, Tom Ford, was in print up there. Some boy had written, hand-printed all of these names himself. Also, we have a brick with our name, says Mr. and Mrs. Tom and Peggy Ford, Newcastle, Indiana, out in the front. And we also have, we met Bill, shook his hand, and he wore a little cloth bracelet. I asked him what that was about, but he never answered. But we also have the bottle of water that he drank out of, and we've got that sitting on our refrigerator. We are so proud, and we can't wait for Hillary to be our #1 lady. And I thank you so much for this program tonight, sir. I am a very, very strong Clinton supporter. Thank you, and I do hope you get better, Brian.
Oh, gosh, I was going to ask her. I'd love to know why she regards President Clinton as her favorite president.
Terry Garner, how often does President Clinton come to that library, and how often can people see him there?
He comes usually once a month or so. There's not a real regular schedule. And that's one of the luxuries of this library, and his feeling for it and his great love for it, actually. He's actually makes himself very available. You'll see him, you might see him walking through, shaking hands, speaking with people. He enjoys being here and watching the people enjoy the museum almost as much as he does. That was a wonderful call. He'll be very happy with that call. We all were.
Mason, Ohio, you're on the air.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for doing the program. It's a great program. I've really enjoyed the whole series, and I want to say also that Bill Clinton's my favorite president. But what I'd like to ask you is, given all the controversy, you know, with the Lewinsky and the Whitewater, how do you think history is going to look on Bill Clinton, especially since he stays in the spotlight more than most any other president, and even more so if Hillary was to be elected president and the role that he would play in her presidency?
Gosh, well, there are some conditionals there, but we're going to talk a little bit about, obviously, the second term and some of the bumps and bruises that the Clinton presidency absorbed during that period in the next hour. Let me just say this. I think 7 years on, who knows, 50 years from now, that a lot of what were portrayed as scandals at the time have been largely forgotten. And my hunch is that that is a process that will continue, and that 30, 40, 50 years from now, historians may look back at the impeachment process and they may not scratch their heads asking why this happened, but I think they'll look at it less for the specific allegations and actions than they will as a window on a very polarized America. And I think then they may ask themselves, why was America so polarized in the 1990s, a period of extensive prosperity, and when a lot of things were going good for people.
Springfield, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. You kind of just completely co-opted my thought. But the second part of my question was going to kind of deal with what you were saying in the perspective of a outside historian 500, 1,500 years from now. In looking backwards, I learned about Caesar and Brutus in Latin class, and the circle around them with the daggers, and that's how you assassinate someone. Where in world history does a world leader getting a blowjob and then trying?
Well, I don't know what you do with that.
I think the dignified thing to do is to move on.
Terry Garner, thank you very much for joining us and helping us with the whole series down there at the museum. As you look ahead, what's the toughest job you have ahead of you in learning about the Bill Clinton presidency, and how are you going about that?
I think the toughest part of this job is he was the president that we will historically know as the presidency that was the end of the industrial age and the beginning of the information age. Our major problem is we have so many artifacts, so many documents, and basically an older process to try to get us through this new age. The emails alone will be a challenge for us for years and years to come. But I can't tell you, it's very exciting to be on the edge of something new and new styles of doing things and new ways of solving problems. I'm looking forward to it more than I can say.
Thanks again, and we look forward to working more with you in the future. The Memphis speech.
Yeah, this is, even his adversaries conceded that Bill Clinton had extraordinary political talents, and among them were his skills as a communicator. Ronald Reagan, of course, was known as the great communicator with a text. Bill Clinton was a great improviser, and you will see that in this clip, which is in November of '93 before a group of African-American ministers, I believe, in Memphis. And follow, if you will, sort of parse, almost deconstruct what you hear, because it really is a window, I think, on how Clinton tried to move beyond a lot of the conventional stereotypes and political labels. He takes cultural conservative themes, which might very well appeal to this group of ministers, and he wraps it in the mantle of Martin Luther King. It's a very, very skillful and well, take a look for yourself. You be the judge.
Martin Luther King, who said, like Moses, I am on the mountaintop and I can see the promised land, but I'm not going to be able to get there with you. But we will get there. If he were to reappear by my side today and give us a report card on the last 25 years, what would he say? Say, you did a good job, he would say, voting and electing people who formerly were not electable because of the color of their skin. You have more political power, and that is good. You did a good job, he would say, letting people who have the ability to do so live wherever they want to live, go wherever they want to go in this great country. You did a good job, he would say, elevating people of color into the ranks of the United States Armed Forces to the very top, or into the very top of our government. You did a very good job, he would say. He would say, you did a good job creating a black middle class of people who really are doing well, and the middle class is growing more among African Americans than among non-African Americans. You did a good job. You did a good job in opening opportunity. But he would say, I did not live and die to see the American family destroyed. I did not live and die to see 13-year-old boys get automatic weapons and gun down 9-year-olds just for the kick of it. I did not live and die to see young people destroy their own lives with drugs and then build fortunes destroying the lives of others. That is not what I came here to do. I fought for freedom, he would say, but not for the freedom of people to kill each other with reckless abandon. Not for the freedom of children to have children and the fathers of the children walk away from them and abandon them as if they don't amount to anything. I fought for people to have the right to work, but not to have whole communities and people abandoned. This is not what I lived and died for. My fellow Americans, he would say, I fought to stop white people from being so filled with hate that they would wreak violence on black people. I did not fight for the right of black people to murder other black people with reckless abandon.
Rob Seibert is an archivist at the William J. Clinton Presidential Library, and he's got something to show us.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I do. Tonight we were actually opening up, you just saw the video of that speech, we are actually opening up the note cards that President Clinton used for that speech. This is the first note card that he used. What was interesting about this speech is that the White House speechwriter did not provide President Clinton text for this speech, so there wasn't a teleprompter here. This was done by note cards, and the White House speechwriter gave President Clinton talking points. And this is a great example of President Clinton just speaking very much off the cuff and taking the speech into, as Richard said, a totally different direction. This next note card, we jump ahead. Again, you show the example of President Clinton just making some major edits in this, and even in the talking points here. The final note card here is actually from part of it from the clip we just saw. Again, President Clinton spoke about a quote from Martin Luther King, and then he talked about if Martin Luther King were alive today, what he would be proud of and what he would not be proud of. Again, this is one of the challenges as an archivist here, is sometimes deciphering President Clinton's handwriting, and this is difficult for us to read at times, but we can make out the word proud. He was proud, Martin Luther King would be proud of the political progress the African Americans had made, the black middle class, open opportunities, but what he would not be proud of is the disintegration of the family, teen pregnancy, abandonment by fathers, the rise in drug use, and the lack of job opportunities or work.
Thank you, Rob Seibert. We'll come back. We're going to break now for a couple minutes, and then we'll continue in our second hour from the William J. Clinton Presidential Library.
For more historic footage and other exclusive materials, go online to our special website, cspan.org/presidential libraries. As part of C-SPAN's series on presidential libraries, C-SPAN Radio will air an exclusive taped interview with former President Clinton from the Clinton Library recorded last week. That's tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio.
Our series, Presidential Libraries, History Uncovered, is now available on DVD. Get your copy of our in-depth look at the archives of the past 12 presidents, with rarely seen film and video, audio recordings, as well as personal documents and artifacts. The set includes all 12 presidential libraries, with additional video clips not seen during the series. A great gift for any history buff. Order your copy for the special price of $49.95. To order Presidential Libraries History Uncovered, go online to cspanvideo.org/products.
I'm pretty sure this century, maybe I won't live long enough to be proved wrong on this, that China will become the world's biggest Christian country. I think that it would be very hard to imagine that not happening.
Sunday on Q&A, John Micklethwaite, the London-based editor-in-chief of The Economist, on his special report on religion, faith, and politics.
It may also become the world's biggest Muslim country, because there are some areas where Islam is growing quite quickly.
The Economist editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite, Sunday night at 8 on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can listen to Q&A on C-SPAN Radio, exclusively on XM Satellite Radio. It's also online as a C-SPAN podcast.
Now we continue with the C-SPAN series, Presidential Libraries, History Uncovered, as we visit the Bill Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock, Arkansas.
You have lost too much, but you have not lost everything. And you have certainly not lost America. For we will stand with you for as many tomorrows as it takes. If ever we needed evidence of that, I could only recall the words of Governor and Mrs. Keating. If anybody thinks that Americans are mostly mean and selfish, they ought to come to Oklahoma. If anybody thinks Americans have lost the capacity for love and caring and courage, they ought to come to Oklahoma. To all my fellow Americans beyond this hall, I say, one thing we owe those who have sacrificed is the duty to purge ourselves of the dark forces which gave rise to this evil. They are forces that threaten our common peace, our freedom, our way of life. Let us teach our children that the God of comfort is also the God of righteousness. Those who trouble their own house will inherit the wind. Justice will prevail. Let us let our own children know that we will stand against the forces of fear. When there is talk of hatred, let us stand up and talk against it. When there is talk of violence, let us stand up and talk against it. In the face of death, let us honor life. As St. Paul admonished us, let us not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
That's video from 1995. President Clinton speaking to the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing. And what you're also looking at now is White House television video of President and Mrs. Clinton meeting with some of the fire and rescue officials in Oklahoma City earlier that same day. This video was released by the Clinton Presidential Library for tonight's 12th and final program in C-SPAN's Presidential Library series. Richard Norton Smith, historian, presidential historian. How has history judged Bill Clinton's reaction to the Oklahoma City bombing? And what did it mean for the rest of his presidency?
Well, I won't purport to speak for history with a capital H, but I think it was a real defining moment in many ways in the Clinton presidency. Remember, in the fall of 1994, probably the low point, certainly politically, when the president lost Congress. And there were those around him, if you read the accounts that have been written, that felt that for a while after that, he really kind of had trouble finding his footing. And the irony is, just a few days before this event, there was a press conference at the White House in which he was actually insisting upon his relevance within the Constitution. Then came the terrorist act that destroyed the Alfred Murrah building, the federal building in Oklahoma City, in April of 95. And the president, presidents don't only speak to us, they speak for us. Bill Clinton was not only commander-in-chief, in many ways he was empathizer-in-chief. And I think you saw that in many ways brilliantly displayed in Oklahoma City. And I think it really was the beginning of a turnaround in many ways. Within a few days after this event that we just saw, there was a poll that showed 84% approval of the president's handling of Oklahoma City. And I think it invested him with a newfound authority that he frankly could put to use later that year.
Rob Seibert at the library down in Little Rock. You have a document from that period you're going to let us see tonight?
Yes, Brian. Just like the Memphis speech, we're actually releasing this document here as well tonight for the first time on C-SPAN. This is a document. It was the statement read by President Clinton the day of the bombing on April 19th, 1995, read in the White House briefing room. Again, what is interesting about this document is, again, just like the Memphis speech, just how heavily edited this was by President Clinton. The statement was probably written very quickly, and it was probably edited very quickly by President Clinton. And I'm going to read this on the first page here, this second paragraph, because it has some very famous language and a very famous phrase and words written by President Clinton. The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on defenseless children and innocent citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil. The United States will not tolerate it. I will not allow the people of this country to be intimidated by evil cowards. What people remember about this statement is the very strong language used by President Clinton, the word cowards and cowardice and an evil act.
Rob Seibert, how long have you been with the Clinton Library?
I've been here a little over 5 years now.
Where'd you come from?
I'm actually local. I'm a local hire.
And what is the job of an archivist there? And I know there's 6 at each one of these presidential libraries. What's your job?
My job is I'm one of the paper and electronic archivists, and we handle all the FOIA requests that come in right now. And basically, when people ask me what our bread and butter job is that we have to do a line-by-line review of each presidential document that comes before us, and we have to determine if it can be released now, later, or much later, according to a federal law that we have to follow. But we're quite busy with the FOIA requests. We're trying to get them out as quickly as possible and get them to researchers.
Thank you, Rob Seibert, for joining us tonight. Richard Norton Smith, what's the rest of this hour?
Well, in the second hour, we're focusing on the second Clinton term, again with the sort of caveat that, as we said earlier, this is a new library, really. It's only open 3 years, and as a result of that, we don't have the pool of film footage, video, and audio recordings that we've been able to draw upon for some of the older libraries. So fortunately, you have the chance to sit down and interview President Clinton, and that's a significant part of this program as well.
And for another 6 minutes here, we're going to look at some of the part of the interview that was done in the replica of the Oval Office of the Bill Clinton presidency. And this entire interview, roughly an hour, will be seen in between the first run of this last in the 12 presidential series about the libraries, and the next and the rerun of it later on. So let's watch Bill Clinton from Monday of this week.
Next to that, or in that same vicinity, you chose to deal with the whole impeachment thing by calling it the fight for power. And on different windows down there, it's ideological battles, a new culture of confrontation, the politics of persecution, the impeachment battle, and politics of personal destruction. How much time did you spend on that whole area?
Well, probably maybe not as much as I should have, because I think it's I wish I had some way of, I tried to depict it as it flowed to the American people. So in that case, I thought it was very accurate. That is, it was a much bigger deal to the press than it was to the public at the time. I think, as you saw in '98, when the Congress was on the verge of impeaching me, and the Republicans outspent us $100 million in the congressional elections, the Democrats picked up 5 seats in the House, and would have picked up many more if more of them had the courage to run against the prevailing press opinion that impeachment was at least something that ought to be done and all that, or was going to be done. We won 5 seats in the 6th year of my presidency. It was the first time since 1822 that happened. James Monroe was president. 1822. And really, we were effectively a one-party country back then. So in effect, it had never happened in American history before. It happened because the American people saw the whole impeachment thing for exactly what it was. It was, and exactly what Newt Gingrich admitted to Erskine Bowles, my chief of staff, it was. When Erskine asked him if he thought he was being hypocritical, and he said, of course. And he said, do you think this is justified by a constitution, law, or history? Of course not. Why are you doing it? Because we can. We're doing it because we can. And because we know once we do it, we can rely on many people in the press to always say we did it without ever saying it was illegitimate. I mean, I like Gingrich because I like a fellow that'll tell you the truth about what his motivations are and why they're doing it. He thought it was something where he could manipulate the press in the present and the historians in the future, and maybe spook the Democrats into running me off. I think he knew me well enough by then to know that he couldn't spook me into running me off. So it was a fight for power. It was nothing but power, and almost 70% of the American people saw it for that. They knew exactly what was going on. And if you remember, there were hundreds and hundreds of constitutional scholars, including a lot of Republicans, who didn't vote for me ever, who signed an ad, full-page ad in the New York Times, 800 of them, against impeachment. They knew it was a total abuse of the Constitution. And it shows you the difference in their party and ours. There's no question that Iran-Contra, for example, constituted impeachable offenses. That is, they were high crimes and misdemeanors of a political nature. And Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, refused to entertain any impeachment proceedings against President Reagan or anybody else. He said it was too damaging to the country, and it was wrong. So he gets treated very differently in history because Tip O'Neill was a great citizen. Gingrich always believed that ruthless power play got better treatment today and tomorrow. And I was betting he was wrong. But even now, you almost never, and you didn't see it at the time, there's almost no press coverage in 1998 of the fact that the Democrats had achieved something historic. All the coverage running up the election was they're going to lose 25 to 35 seats. It's going to be a calamity. The American people are going to collapse the Democratic Party. And instead, they hit the Republicans between the eyes with a 2-before and did something that had never happened before in the two-party system in America. So the public agreed with me, and they were right. It was about power. Doesn't excuse the personal mistake I made, but it was not an impeachable offense. And it came at the end, and no one ever says today, came at the end of a Whitewater inquiry, which there was nothing to, in which Hillary and I were completely exonerated by an exceedingly partisan prosecutor who could never find anything we did wrong. A civil lawsuit where I was completely exonerated by a judge who was a political opponent of mine. Everybody in this was against me. Politically, I mean. They did, and they all said, when they got right down to it, we can't find anything they've done wrong. So that's what made this impeachment thing so wonderful for them. It like justified squandering $70 million of the taxpayers' money, indicting innocent people because they wouldn't lie. The most horrendous string of behavior, which the public remembered, even though, sadly, I think it was one of the great failures of the mainstream media in history. They never report the results of the '98 election. They never talk about how nothing was ever found. They never do it. They always talk about the impeachment. That's still a good story for them. So Gingrich understood them better than I did because I thought they would have a much better sense of fairness and balance. He was right about that. My presentation of this in the library is what I honestly believe it was. And people are perfectly free to disagree with me. But when they do, they ought to be called upon to talk about the facts that they don't discuss. And I would be happy, actually, at some point, we probably ought to have a broader treatment of it, you know. Let people come in and argue both sides. But the public rendered their judgment, and they were right. And they helped to save the Constitution. The American people helped to save the Constitution against people who wanted power more than constitutional government.
Richard Norton Smith, we have a live camera on that section, Fight for Power exhibit, which deals with this whole impeachment thing. How do you think this is playing right now in history?
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I mean, I think most people have forgotten the details about a lot of this, and that tells you something in and of itself. Two very quick points. One is, in the spring of '98, the U.S. Supreme Court in some ways set a lot of this in motion in a unanimous decision that said that a sitting president could be sued, could be the target of a civil lawsuit. That, of course, opened the floodgates for the Paula Jones suit to proceed, and a great deal flowed out of that. And I wonder if any of the justices wish they could have that vote back, because that turned out to be enormously significant, and theoretically could happen to any president in the future. The other very quick point that no one stopped to think about it, and that is, what if? What if the president and the country had that year back? Bill Clinton had indicated to people that he wanted to take on the third rail of American politics, entitlement reform, in 1998. That, of course, went down the drain. The fact is the country spent an entire year on a process, the outcome of which was pretty well known from the beginning, and any shot at entitlement reform was lost with it.
Newt Gingrich, by the way, will be on this network for 3 hours live on Sunday beginning at noon East Coast time on C-SPAN 2, Book TV, to talk about his writings. We have a couple of clips we're going to run back to back. One of them is this Clinton address to the nation on airstrikes against Afghanistan and the Sudan.
Right. Well, terrorism, of course, in the 1990s was a very significant topic, and you had the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. You had the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, truck bombing where the 19 U.S. servicemen killed. And then, of course, the immediate antecedent to what we're about to see is the bombing in Africa of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. And what you're about to see is the president's response to that.
And following that will be a clip of a discussion we had briefly on Monday about in the display the 10 most wanted men in America by the FBI, Osama bin Laden.
That's right. I think it may surprise a lot of people to realize that Usama, as the president refers to him, bin Laden's name was at that point on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security. I want to speak with you about the objective of this action and why it was necessary. Our target was terror. Our mission was clear: to strike at the network of radical groups affiliated with and funded by Osama bin Laden, perhaps the preeminent organizer and financier of international terrorism in the world today. The groups associated with him come from diverse places but share a hatred for democracy, a fanatical glorification of violence, and a horrible distortion of their religion to justify the murder of innocents. They have made the United States their adversary precisely because of what we stand for and what we stand against. A few months ago, and again this week, bin Laden publicly vowed to wage a terrorist war against America, saying, and I quote, "We do not differentiate between those dressed in military uniforms and civilians. They're all targets. Their mission is murder, and their history is bloody." The most recent terrorist events are fresh in our memory. 2 weeks ago, 12 Americans and nearly 300 Kenyans and Tanzanians lost their lives, and another 5,000 were wounded when our embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were bombed. There is convincing information from our intelligence community that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for these bombings. Based on this information, we have high confidence that these bombings were planned, financed, and carried out by the organization bin Laden leads. America has battled terrorism for many years. Where possible, we've used law enforcement and diplomatic tools to wage the fight. The long arm of American law has reached out around the world and brought to trial those guilty of attacks in New York, in Virginia, and in the Pacific. We have quietly disrupted terrorist groups and foiled their plots. We have isolated countries that practice terrorism. We've worked to build an international coalition against terror. But there have been and will be times when law enforcement and diplomatic tools are simply not enough. My fellow Americans, our battle against terrorism did not begin with the bombing of our embassies in Africa, nor will it end with today's strike. It will require strength, courage, and endurance. We will not yield to this threat. We will meet it no matter how long it may take. This will be a long, ongoing struggle between freedom and fanaticism, between the rule of law and terrorism. We must be prepared to do all that we can for as long as we must. America is and will remain a target of terrorists precisely because we are leaders, because we act to advance peace, democracy, and basic human values, because we're the most open society on earth, and because, as we have shown yet again, we take an uncompromising stand against terrorism.
One of the things you notice in the museum is that everything gets equal treatment. In other words, nothing blares out at you, and what I mean by that is the headings over the different sections that you look at. Confronting conflicts, making peace. Expanding our shared prosperity. Preparing for new threats. That's the whole area where you do Oklahoma City. And there's one very interesting little poster in there, and it's from June of 1999, Osama bin Laden, in his picture, the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive up on the wall, and it's from the embassy bombings. Did you think through specifics like that? Did you want that in there for a reason?
Yes. Well, because when I was in my second term, we were virtually obsessed, my security team and I were, with Osama bin Laden. I knew he was an intelligent, resourceful, profoundly committed person. I thought he had the courage of his convictions, which I deplored. I completely disagree with him. But it made him a very formidable adversary. And we spent an enormous amount of time both tracking him before the embassy bombings and afterward. It was only after 9/11 that it looked as if Al-Qaeda might have had some involvement in Black Hawk Down in Somalia. No one thought that at the time. Nobody thought they were operational. We had no information that they were involved in that or the first World Trade Center bombing. But we knew by certainly this last 3 years of my second term that he was a very formidable, dangerous person who ought to be thwarted wherever possible and captured if possible, and if not, killed if possible, because he was determined to do that to us.
Richard Norton Smith, that's a live picture of that poster. Did you know that Osama bin Laden was one of the 10 FBI's most wanted fugitives?
I have to confess I didn't until tonight.
What did you think of Bill Clinton's analysis?
Well, you know, it's interesting. There's plenty of independent evidence to back him up when he says that this was a subject that was very high on the White House agenda. If you look at John Harris's wonderful book called The Survivor, his account of the Clinton presidency, he recounts a number of these meetings and what were perceived as opportunities to get bin Laden. To give you an example, the CIA said that they thought he was in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, in a compound inhabited by many other families, and they put the chance of taking him out at 40%. And clearly there was consideration at that time involving the president, who asked a lot of questions, I think a lot of intelligent questions, about the consequences of trying and failing and killing a lot of civilians. So, you know, after the fact, well, you know, lots of people are going to go back and try to rewrite and impute, but the fact that I didn't know he was on the top 10 list tells you something.
One of the things that we did after sitting down in the Oval Office with the president on Monday was take our camera and go up right above the Oval Office where the executive suite is located. And this is the first time cameras have ever been allowed in here, just to show you a little bit of what President Clinton's office is like down at the library, and also out on the roof area, which you'll see for yourself what the view of Little Rock is. This is about 5.5 minutes.
This is right over the Oval Office. This is my apartment here. And this is right over the Oval Office. So I have brought here some things that are part of the presidential collection, which are, a few of these things are my personal things. Most of these are part of the archives. So the president is permitted, any part of this complex can borrow things from the archives. So I have some things that are there and some things that are mine. But these books here, most of these books are books that I have had for 30 years, sometimes more. A lot of these books I had when I was in college. A lot of them I acquired when I was in law school and then along the way. But those are political biographies there. Those are some of my small part of my Arkansas books. Most of them are over in the Clinton School headquarters. And those are biographies of foreign leaders. Those are history books and political science books and novels. But they're all, these are just a small number of the books I've collected over my life. When I was the lowest paid governor in America, and I had the lowest net worth of any president in the 20th century in inflation-adjusted dollars. So about all I could afford to collect were books. And I had lots of books over my life and read them. I always hate to give them away. But there are a lot of things that mean a lot to me. That's my mother's old football purse that she used to carry to the Arkansas Razorback games. So after she passed away, I keep that around as a memory of my mother. The city gave me this land, but I told them I didn't want to take the land, I wanted to enhance it. So my idea was that we would make a park here that would be accessible to the public at all hours. Yeah. So I'll show you what we were trying to do here. So we took this land, which was essentially down, and then we built the library up. I explained all this to the architect when we started, and it was right after I said we started right after the '96 election. So this idea of a bridge to the 21st century was fresh in everybody's mind. We had this bridge here, so they built this like a modern bridge, throwing it out toward the water and off the ground to maximize the open land available to the public. And I'll take you around to the side. So, but for me, this is a joy to be here, because when I'm sitting here, I can see up there the dome of the state capitol, where I spent 12 years as governor and 2 years as attorney general. I'm right down the street from the old state capitol right over there, which is where I made all my important announcements in public life. The governor's mansion is right over there, where I lived for almost 12 years, just right up the street there. So, and all of this area in old Little Rock is now in the process of being rebuilt because of the library. The city people tell me they've had $1.5 billion of new investment here. You can see. Well, you've probably already shown this of how we drive around here.
Yeah.
But our idea when we built it was, the library, was to connect these. This is North Little Rock over here and Little Rock here. We had two ideas. One is we wanted to preserve all these wetlands here. You see these little outgrowths? And we just kicked off a $2 million project that will clean and preserve all the wetlands here and here. And it's amazing. We have egrets here. We have red fox out there on the wetland. We have amazing things. And now we're going to have walking paths where people can go through here and learn about water filtration and how the ecosystem works in this very small piece of land. And then we're going to fix this bridge so that it's accessible for people with disabilities too, so that it'll have a big arch over it. And we're going to do the walkway, because see, we have to leave the midsection up because the Arkansas River is still navigable here. So we're going to build an archway design and then fix the bridge up and then be able to light it at night. It's going to be quite beautiful.
What's the time frame on getting that done?
Depends on how long it takes us to raise the extra money. Now, they asked me to raise or give $4 million to it, and I said I would. Now they say they want to spend $13 million on the project, so we've got to go get some more money for it.
And over here on the right is...
Yeah, this is my green roof. You want to step up?
Sure.
Here, you see, so this goes back into my apartment there, you see, where we live when we're here. And if you look on the other side, just come real quick and I'll show you the green roof. But see, this is the rest of my land here, where you see the landscaping, and you see the rest of the wetlands and how wild it is there.
You can see that complete explanation of the green roof and other parts of this executive suite for the full hour in between our two programs tonight, and it'll be over in just about, this program will be over in about 25 minutes. We're going to have some phones, 202-737-0001 for Democrats, 202-737-0002 for Republicans, and 202-628-0205 for people who are independents. Christine Mao, curator of the Clinton Presidential Library, what can you show us in that big box you've got there?
I do have a big box here. This is one of many very large boxes that we have in our collection. We have about 250 boxes like this in our collection, and they are full of items. This particular box, as you can see on the side, is box number 70 of the foreign gifts. And if you take a look inside of it, you can see it's full of stuff. So for us, doing our job is sort of like having every day is Christmas, and we get to open the boxes and see what's inside of them. So let's pull something out. Take a look at it. Get rid of this. And everything that comes to us from the White House comes with a slip of paper like this pink one right here that tells us who gave it, and every object has a number on it, so we can control better where our things are, and we can do inventories and things like that using these control slips that we got from the White House. This particular piece is a head of state gift. It's a gift from Beena Kak, who is the Minister of State for Tourism from India. And as you can see, it's a collection of frogs. And it's quite an appropriate gift because President Clinton collects frogs. So we have jade frogs and we have quartz frogs in here and different stone carved frogs. And they're quite lovely little pieces.
I noticed right behind you there are a couple of paintings.
Yes, these are two paintings from our collection as well. The one over here on your left is a wonderful painting. This is actually a post-presidential gift. It was a gift to us in 2003. And the artist's name is Kata Billup. And the title of the painting is Elvis Introduces a Bill to Congress. And it's obviously of Elvis Presley introducing Bill Clinton with his saxophone standing on a stage. And it's a great frame. There are some French fries with ketchup on the top of the frame. And the title is written in Scrabble letters down here on the bottom of the frame. This painting is actually a head of state gift from Prime Minister Vajpayee from India. And it's a portrait of the Clintons with Jesus up above them blessing them.
What's the job of curator?
My job is to take care of the collection. And also I'm take care of the exhibits and temporary exhibits. We do changing exhibits here, 2 or 3 of them a year. So we also do that with our staff.
Richard Norton Smith, I understand you know this young lady.
I do. I'm honored to say I know her. I think I hired her several eons ago at the Hoover Library, which of course was how we began this series 12 weeks ago. And Christine, you've done a fantastic job.
I'm grateful to you for that, Richard.
Well, you've earned everything,
you.
And the Clinton Library is very fortunate to have you.
Christine Mao, where are you from originally?
I'm happy to be here. Holland, Michigan.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're going to take some calls. Tifton, Georgia, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I'd like to know about the 93 inauguration medal and the background of it, please.
The 93 inauguration medallion? Was that your question?
Yes, sir.
Do you know anything about it?
I do not. No, that would be something that I'm sure folks at the library could answer.
I don't know whether Christine's still with us. Terry Garner is going to join us, the director of the library. Why don't we go on and take another call, and we'll come back to that. Salisbury, North Carolina, you're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to hear Mr. Smith comment about Ross Perot and how his running affected Bill Clinton's election and then his re-election. In particular, I guess, the number of votes that went Democratic that might have went Republican if Perot had not been running.
First of all, I'm glad you asked that, because that is a very significant factor, not only in President Clinton's first election, but really in his policy agenda. Remember, what Ross Perot really succeeded in doing in 1992 was to put on the national agenda the issue of the deficit and deficit reduction. And in fact, it became a top priority of the new Clinton administration, even to the point where it crowded out some of the new programs and new investments that the president, I think, left to his own preferences, would have put first. And it led in turn to the 1993 Budget Act, which most people now look upon as a significant factor in getting us to balanced budgets and indeed surpluses before the Clinton presidency was over. So Ross Perot was a very significant influencer of policy. In 1996, he ran again. He drew less than half. I think he got about 8% of the vote as opposed to 19%. And I don't think he significantly affected the outcome of that year's election.
Pinehurst, North Carolina, you're on the air.
Yes. First of all, I think you both
Richard and Brian, you conducted yourself with a great amount of dignity over the past series of shows, and I really appreciate it. I know this was a hard one for you, but my question is regarding
Terry Garner, do you know the answer to that?
Yes, the personal papers of the president are not part of the archives. It is only by the administration. His personal papers and the First Lady's personal papers are their own.
Crescent City, California, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm running. Did Clinton avoid impeachment by trying to bomb Saddam in 1998?
Very political question.
Well, no, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting. In October 31st, 1998, President Clinton signed legislation which declared that it was American policy to promote regime change. That's the term that was used in Iraq, although it explicitly also ruled out the use of American ground forces to do so. 2 months later, in December, there was a 4-day campaign of bombing, which was, I think, part of a larger ongoing effort, I guess what I would call containment of Saddam.
Yadkinville, North Carolina. Go ahead, please.
Brian, yes, it's good to hear you, and I'm sorry about your congestion. I've just gotten over that myself. When I was at the library 2 years ago, I noticed that the presidential limousine did not have a license plate on the front of it. And before President Clinton left office, there was a D.C. statehood license plate on there. And I was wondering if I asked the curator if one could be put on there, and I was curious to know if one has been affixed on there now.
Thanks. Terry Garner, do you know?
I'm checking with the staff right now. I was struggling to understand the question. I didn't hear it as well as I could. Is it the license plate on the limousine?
He wanted to know whether there was a D.C. statehood license plate that had been put on the limousine, because it used to have one on it when the president was using the limousine here in Washington.
That limousine that's down there is on loan from the Secret Service. So the license plate, I'm not sure. It's not his official car. It isn't the one that he actually was driving in Washington, which is probably what has confused the caller. This is on loan from the Secret Service.
Let's go to Bowling Green, Kentucky next. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I have a question about the president. I met the president in 1994 as I was the lead funeral director who buried Congressman Bill Natcher from the 2nd District in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And the president seemed to be a very personable person. He seemed to be someone who enjoyed being out in the public, talking to the people. In this instance, he could have spoke from the Rose Garden and commented on the death of Congressman Natcher, but he decided to come to Bowling Green and speak at the funeral, and he seemed to very much enjoy it. And he seems like one of the presidents that enjoyed this more than others. As you've seen through the series, or as I've seen you speak on all these other presidents, he seems to be one that very much sticks out as a person who enjoys talking to people. And I personally was mesmerized at his communication skills and his ability. So I just wanted to hear a comment about that.
Thanks, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, Congressman Natcher held I think probably a very special place in Bill Clinton's heart, because at a critical moment on that 1993 Budget Act that we were talking about, when it was by no means certain that it was going to pass, the president was lobbying a number of congressmen. Congressman Natcher, I think at that point, had been in Congress for close to 40 years and had never missed a vote. And he made it very clear he didn't need to be lobbied. He just told the president that, I want to see you succeed. And I'm sure that came like manna from heaven at that point. In terms of the president's temperament and his enjoyment of the job, I think that's transparent. I think he loved being president, and it comes through in everything we've seen.
Chicago, go ahead.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to call. Thank you for taking my call, first of all, and I absolutely love C-SPAN. I just wanted to comment and say that President Clinton, by far, was my very favorite president. I'm 43 years old, so I'm pretty much in the generation right after his, and I feel saddened by how a certain percentage of the world has given him such a bad rap when it truly was not deserved. I think he was truly America's president, and I'm an African-American woman, and I think for me to say that is pretty significant, considering what we've had to go through as a people.
Thanks, caller. Terry Garner, before we let you go, we're going to run a clip on the green roof. The president seems to really like this green roof. Why?
Well, he likes it for a lot of reasons. I think he enjoys the space. It is a nice space, and he was so instrumental in designing it. And he is so concerned about the environment. And this is the final cap on receiving the LEED award at the Platinum Award just this month, actually. When the building was opened, it was opened with the Silver Award. This was really a coup de grace for him, and he's very, very happy with it. He could spend hours up there. And I'm sure, actually, probably, Richard, Brian, that's where you got that cold, I'm convinced. We were out there so long on Monday. That's what happened to you. So we're very sorry. We're sorry, we didn't mean that.
Thank you.
But you're welcome.
Thanks again, Terry Garner, for helping us out. Let's look at this clip of part of the interview on the green roof.
The green roof. Yeah, let's go. So this is only the beginning. You can barely see it, but we have here a total of 7,000 different plantings in this little roof, and about 90 different kinds of vegetation, all found in Arkansas and in this part of America. So I'll have a little botanical garden here when all this grows out. See, we just got the sprigs. But let me explain what the purpose of it is. This will look, when it grows out, like a lush carpet. And it has two environmental purposes. One is it will absorb carbon dioxide and cool the building. That is, when you have a green roof like this, the greenery will absorb carbon dioxide and it will keep heat out of the building, so it will lower the air conditioning demands of the building. Or in the wintertime, it will lower the heating demands of the building. And therefore, our energy bill will go down. It complements what we've already done. We've got 10 miles of tubing underneath the floors in there, and we run hot water in the winter and cold water in the summer through there and cut our air conditioning bill. That plus the lighting and other changes before we did this had already cut our energy bill 34%. So this will cut it more. We just don't know how much yet when it goes out. So you do that. The second thing this does is to efficiently use and capture the rainwater. So it's not just runoff, it's not just wasted, and we don't have to spend energy and water coming up here and watering the plants as much. If you look at the Heifer building, you see they've done an even more efficient thing. See that big square thing? They capture all the rainwater there and recycle it through that big drop. So this is a rain, and we did the same thing in the back with a little putting green they put in back there. But that's just incidental. It's just to absorb the rainwater, because the more you can absorb and recycle rainwater, the less regular water you have to use, the less energy you use. But you can see it when it's all grown out. See how pretty it's going to be?
When did you start this?
A few months ago. We did everything we could within the budget we had when we opened the library, and then we began working with, we got a silver LEEDs rating, and the highest rating they give silver and gold and platinum. The highest rating they give is platinum. So we began working with them on things we could do to get a platinum rating. My next goal is to figure out whether we have made this, in theory, an energy neutral building already, because we pay a little more for the electricity we buy to get wind energy, and the local utility purchases wind energy. But what I'd like to do, you can see the wind blows pretty well up here along the river, and what I'd like to do is to explore whether, either in cooperation with the city of North Little Rock, if you see their park starts right there. They have this land, and they want to build parkland going all the way down here. And then you may be able to see it a little, not so good, but they actually have, there's a very nice park starting right on the other side of that stadium that goes for miles up that way. And then this park here goes a good ways up that way. So what we're trying to do is to connect these two cities, the arena with the library, and we're talking about whether we can also jointly generate wind power. So we might be able to get to the point where we, if you look over here, where we can put a windmill up here that might make our two buildings here completely carbon neutral. We'd be generating all of our own energy for the rest. I don't know exactly what the economics are. We're doing a study of it now.
Richard Norton Smith, this is a picture inside the Clinton Museum. We're getting near the end of this series. Any thoughts as you listen to President Clinton talk about that roof?
You get us. He cares. This is a man of protean energy and enthusiasms, and I think curiosities. And he's obviously passionate about this place, and I think that's a revealing side of him and his leadership.
I want to say to the audience, those of you who expect a political show every time we talk about presidents, this has been meant just to show you how these libraries operate, what an archivist does, a curator, a library director, what the relationship is with the National Archives and Records Administration run by Alan Weinstein and Sharon Fawcett, who you met last week. And it was a kind of a treasure hunt for us. We've got one more clip to go, and this is where we ask Bill Clinton about his final thoughts on the presidential library, on the idea of the future, of his goals for the library. And let's watch that, and then we'll wrap this up.
Here's the big question. If your wife's elected president, you're going to have a dual library?
I don't know. She'll just say, of course she's entitled to have her own, and she'll do whatever she does. But I'm more interested in what I would do. We haven't talked much about it because I'm superstitious. When you're running for election, you should never assume you're going to win. You should just gut it out every day. But I hope I'll be able to continue to do this work because I think it's good for America and for the world, and something I can do, with people like former President Bush and former President Carter and I do some things together. And mostly it's stuff I do on my own all around the world, in AIDS and poverty alleviation and fighting climate change. All these things are really important to the United States. Now, I will also do whatever I'm asked to do if people elect her. I hope they will. I think it'd be a good thing. But if they do, the first thing is to support the president, always. And it would be for me. But I think she agrees that this foundation is doing a lot of good work around the world, and it's an important part of, our life together and where we've been and where we're going. And that's what I'm trying to communicate to these young people at the school. This public service is really important. It matters. It's what I'm trying to do with this library. I want people to come in and say, okay, this is not just about, some big fight over impeachment or something. This is about ideas, implementation, consequences on people. I think you have to constantly fight to give politics back to the people. I think that it breeds more cynicism than anything else when people think people in public life don't care about them and that politics is being taken away from them, that it's about the politicians instead of about the public. This library attempts to give it back to them in a good way. And that's what the public service school does too. I try to empower people through public service and to make people believe it's noble. I left the White House more idealistic than I entered it after all I went through, because I was more convinced than ever before that well-motivated people who have good ideas and the discipline to pursue them over time can make a huge difference, that it really makes a difference. And in spite of the fact that I had my differences with some of the Republican leaders, the vast majority of people I've known in politics, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals, were honest, smart, hard-working people who tried to do what they thought was right.
And I think that's not the perception so much in America today because of a lot of things. I wanted people to see that. I wanted people, even the people who disagreed with what I did as president, to come through this library and say, well, you know, it makes a difference. I don't agree with what he did, but it does make a difference. It makes a difference who wins, what their ideas are, and whether they can execute. And of course, for the people that did support me, I hope they see that we got the results that we said we would. But the most important thing is for people to believe the system can work and will make a difference. That's what I try to do with this library.
The public service school that President Clinton was referring to is right there on the property. And tonight, Skip Rutherford, who's the dean there, and his 30 students that are getting a master's degree were watching this and keeping an eye on you and whether or not you said the right or the wrong thing. What, as a final comment on the series, what have you learned?
Oh, gosh, I've learned a lot. As I say, I think one thing we all know is that what we think we know about a president the day he leaves office is going to change. And I think we see that with President Clinton. I mean, one tiny example of how he changed things in ways that I'm not sure even his own party has fully come to terms with. The definition of liberalism, economic liberalism. The New Deal defined economic liberalism as, in effect, redistribution of existing wealth. Bill Clinton, in the 90s, an era of dynamic, buoyant economic growth, redefined economic liberalism as giving everyone a shot at their share of that dynamic, booming economy. That's a subtle but important distinction. And I think it's going to be a long time before we all come to terms with all of the implications of the changes that took place in the 90s. But that is a process that has taken place and in many cases is still taking place for each of these presidents going back all the way to Herbert Hoover. The other thing I want to say, most important of all, is to thank you, to thank everyone here who has worked so hard on this, and most of all to say thank you to the viewers, because as you know, that's why and who we do it for, and their response to this series has more than justified our hopes at the outset.
This series was over a year in the making, and it was produced, executive producer Mark Farkas. You've heard us talk a lot about Mark. You saw him last week if you watched the show. The researcher who went from library to library looking for new information was Eric Nelson. Delia Rios, Connie Debley helped on this a lot. And in Little Rock, Russell Logan was our Clinton program producer and field producer. Eric Hansen was our field director and crew chief. Jake Scheuer and Bob Young on camera. Bob Young actually put that camera on his shoulder for that entire interview up and around the private quarters there. Andy Miller on audio, Chris Hansen on lighting, Rick Stoddard, a production assistant, and Tony Pronko, engineer for this series. Here in our studios, Maurice Haynes was our director. Chris Franz on audio, Jamie Statler, assistant director on the RoboCam, KJ Carrick. Our floor director was Mike Holden, and master control operator John Kane, and our crew chief for this master control group was Christina Perry. A lot of thanks to a lot of people, and especially to Terry Garner and the group down there at the Clinton Library and all the other directors for helping us so much during this series. Have a good evening.
For more historic footage and other exclusive materials, go online to our special website, cspan.org/presidential libraries. As part of C-SPAN's series on presidential libraries, C-SPAN Radio